A terrifying string of carjackings turned deadly, plunging Washington, D.C. into a wave of fear. One after another, innocent people were targeted, and the ballistic evidence left behind pointed clearly to a single ruthless killer on the loose. He even attempted to run one of his victims over with a stolen car. As the FBI and local police closed and they set a trap, but erupted in a storm of gunfire, ending in chaos. Back in the early 1990s, a series of brutal murders started taking place under the cover of night. The killer's hunting grounds were the quiet suburbs surrounding the nation's capital. His chosen victims? Everyday car owners. "I used to lead the FBI's New York office," recalled one agent. "This guy was smart, elusive. He moved fast and struck without mercy." November 13th, 1991. The town of Silver Spring, Maryland, just north of D.C., was shaken by gunfire at a local car dealership. When police from Montgomery County arrived, they found a woman dead at the scene. A second person, critically injured, was barely clinging to life. Medics rushed him to the hospital. Though unconscious, he still had a pulse. Detective Dave from Montgomery County was put in charge of the case. His mission was clear: act fast, gather every piece of evidence possible, and catch whoever was behind this before they had a chance to vanish. "Every murder is a race against time," he explained. "The more the clock ticks, the lower the odds of solving it." The victims that night were janitors, working the late shift. It seemed like a typical night, until someone tried to ambush them. Investigators considered a possible robbery. After all, it was a car dealership. Maybe the killer wanted a vehicle? But when they asked the dealership for a list of missing property, everything was accounted for. No cars, no valuables, not even tools had been taken. The victims' car keys were found right next to their bodies. Their own vehicles were still in the lot. Not even their wallets had been touched. That ruled out a robbery gone wrong. So what was the motive? The surviving victim remained in a coma, offering no clues. Doctors were unable to get a statement from him. Days later, he passed away without regaining consciousness. It was a tragic dead end. During the autopsies, investigators recovered a vital piece of evidence: bullets lodged in the bodies. These were sent straight to the Maryland State Police's lab for ballistic analysis. Forensic specialist Joe Carjacking examined the bullets under a microscope. He wanted to know, were there multiple shooters? It turned out all the bullets had been fired from the same weapon. By studying the scratches and grooves on the bullets, Carjacking was able to determine the gun was a .357 caliber revolver, specifically a Ruger .357. With that one detail, they had the first real thread to follow. With no clear motive, detectives turned their attention to the victims' private lives. Were there personal grudges? Affairs? Someone with a reason to want revenge? They chased every lead. One by one, each possibility came up empty. There was simply no logical reason these people were targeted. Still, they circled back to the idea of a carjacking attempt. The keys were right there. Maybe the killer had demanded them, and something went horribly wrong. Reconstructing the crime, detectives believe the attacker may have tried to take the car, but lost control of the situation. Panicked, he shot both victims, possibly in frustration, before searching for the vehicle. What started as a robbery ended in cold-blooded murder. And with that, the killer vanished again. Months later, detectives found themselves facing yet another murder. This time, the victim was Dr. Shaheen Hartrudy, a respected psychology professor. Her body was discovered in a parking lot in Bethesda, Maryland. But unlike the previous case, her car was missing, leading police to suspect this was a fatal carjacking. Curiously, there was no blood at the scene, suggesting she had been shot while still inside her vehicle. Through conversations with her colleagues, police learned that she had left her office around 8 p.m. that night. Investigators believed someone was waiting for her in the shadows. He stepped out, weapon in hand, and ordered her to get into her car. "Start the engine. Keep your hands where I can see them," he might have said. Once she did, he pulled the trigger. A single gunshot to the head. No witnesses. No mercy. The bullets, once again, became the key to unraveling the case. Forensics experts ran a match against the earlier double homicide. The result? The same weapon had been used in both killings. Now, It was no longer just a pair of isolated incidents. The murders were connected. A serial killer was operating in the Washington, D.C. area. Investigators began combing through old files, hunting for any similar unsolved cases. They soon stumbled across another shooting, just 1 month before Dr. Hartrudy's murder. The details were chillingly familiar. A single shot to the head with a high-caliber handgun, and once again, the victim's car keys were found at the scene. Oddly, this victim didn't even own a car. So what was going on? The detectives started questioning whether these killings were really about stealing vehicles. The patterns were too similar to ignore. All the bullets came from the same gun. Capera confirmed after reviewing the ballistics. We're dealing with one person. But that raised another question. Why was this person so quick to kill? None of the victims were armed. Most didn't seem to pose any real threat. Police came up with 2 possibilities. Either the suspect lost control and resorted to murder out of panic, or, and this was more disturbing, he chose his victims with intent. There may have been a psychological trigger, something personal that made him pull the trigger. The FBI now believed the killer was still operating in Montgomery County, a place he clearly knew well and felt comfortable in. It was his home turf, and he'd struck there multiple times. Authorities suspected he'd strike again, but without a way to identify him, they had no idea where or when he would appear. Their only solid lead? The weapon. It had been used in every murder so far. That gun tied the killer to crimes. But if he found out they had connected the cases, there was a real risk he might destroy it. To prevent that, investigators made a calculated decision. They didn't tell the media. If the killer stayed unaware of their discovery, they had a better chance of catching him with the murder weapon still in his possession. They stayed quiet. The hunt continued. Then, just a week after Dr. Hartrudy's death, a masked man with latex gloves walked into a bank in Chantilly, Virginia. He wasn't there to talk. "Don't move, or I'll shoot every one of you," he barked as he waved his gun. Security cameras caught the entire robbery on tape. One witness even caught a glimpse of the getaway vehicle, a white car recently stolen. When the license plate was checked, it turned out to be fake, taken from another car in nearby Virginia. Still, the car itself matched the description of Dr. Hartrudy's missing vehicle. It was a chilling realization. The man who murdered her had likely used her car to rob a bank. Detectives in Montgomery County were paying close attention. Something about this latest bank robbery felt familiar. The method, the timing, the aggression. When they reviewed the surveillance footage, their suspicions were confirmed. The gun the masked robber used was the same .357 revolver tied to the previous murders. That changed everything. "This could be our guy," said Special Agent Robert Coffey from the FBI. And now we had him on camera. They released the footage to the local media, hoping someone might recognize the suspect, especially since the weapon was clearly visible. Investigators also shared a critical detail. During the robbery, the cash in the getaway vehicle were likely stained with bright red dye. That was no accident. As a security measure, one of the bank employees had slipped the dye pack into the stolen money. Once triggered, the pack exploded, releasing a permanent red ink that coated everything, including the thief, if he wasn't careful. Just 5 days later, officers in Northern Virginia spotted a car with stolen tags. When they ran the vehicle identification number, it turned out to be Dr. Hartrudy's missing car. Inside the vehicle, police noticed red stains, remnants from the dye pack. It was clear this was the car used in the Chantilly bank robbery. Investigators towed the car to a forensic garage for a thorough search. Inside, they found blood. It was tested and matched Hartrudy's DNA, confirming she'd been killed in that vehicle. Finally, the pieces started to come together. They had a motive. The killer was targeting people to steal their cars and then using those vehicles to rob banks. The murders were just a means to an end, but they still didn't know who he was. They turned to unsolved cases with similar patterns, hoping to identify the man behind the violence. One case stood out. It happened nearly a year earlier. The victim, a male maintenance worker, had been approached by a masked gunman who demanded his car keys. The man claimed he didn't own a car. "Then what's this?" The attacker snapped, pointing at a nearby vehicle. When the victim hesitated, The assailant forced him to his knees and told him to put his hands behind his head. It looked like an execution was coming. The shooter fired 3 times. One bullet hit the man's arm, but miraculously, he survived. He crawled away, hid in the bushes, and waited. 10 minutes later, when he flagged down a passing car for help, he was horrified. The driver was the same masked gunman. Luckily, a neighbor had already called the police, and the suspect fled. The very next day, a nearby bank was robbed. Surveillance footage showed the getaway car matched the maintenance worker's vehicle, the one the gunman had tried to steal. Police recovered a fragment of a bullet from the original shooting and sent it to the lab. Ballistics expert Joe Capera compared it with the other projectiles from the previous murders. It was a match. Still, there was no name, no identity, just a growing trail of destruction. Investigators needed a breakthrough, and fast. They began analyzing the killer's behavior, hoping to uncover something useful. He was bold, confident, brazen enough to wait near the scene for 10 minutes. Sure the police wouldn't catch him. That level of calm suggested someone experienced and dangerous. He also showed signs of anger and possibly revenge. One victim had escaped, and it seemed to enrage him. Was he killing to regain control, or was there something deeper driving him? The violence felt excessive. These weren't random acts. He wasn't just stealing. He was murdering people who posed no real threat. The profile was disturbing, highly intelligent, deeply disturbed, and using multiple jurisdictions to his advantage. By switching cars, plates, and counties, he kept law enforcement off balance. He even abandoned vehicles shortly after using them, often leaving the keys inside, so they'd be stolen again. That destroyed potential evidence and made tracking him even harder. All the cops had left to rely on were the bullets, and they were running out of time. The killer's pattern was clear now. Steal a car, use it to rob a bank, and dump it soon after, all while leaving a trail of chaos in his wake. Investigators widened their search, digging into more cold cases involving stolen cars later linked to bank robberies. One incident stood out. A woman had just left a medical clinic when she noticed someone following her. Nervously, she turned back toward the building, but it was too late. A man wearing a mask stepped out, aimed a gun at her, and demanded the keys. She complied without hesitation. "Start the engine." "Now get out," he ordered. Then he forced her to kneel with her hands in the air, telling her not to move. She waited there for what felt like forever, 30 to 40 seconds, completely still, unsure whether she was about to die. He eventually ran off without shooting her. The next day, her car was used in yet another bank robbery. This puzzled investigators. Why was she spared when others weren't? What made this case different? They brainstormed possible answers. Maybe it was something about her age, her race, her demeanor. One theory suggested the killer might have racial biases, as she was a white woman while most of the victims were people of color. Another idea was that something about the situation threw him off, making him second-guess pulling the trigger. It was all speculation, but they knew one thing for sure. He was unpredictable. Despite having only fragments of evidence, the team refused to give up. They knew they had to find a way to catch him before he struck again. The key, they realized, was predicting what he'd do next. Car thefts were difficult to anticipate. They happened randomly and across different counties. But there was one thing the killer always followed up with: a bank robbery. If they could figure out which bank he'd target next, they might finally catch him in the act. The FBI and local police studied aerial footage of past crime scenes, focusing not on the banks themselves, but on the escape routes. They noticed a striking pattern. Every bank was located near a major road that led directly to a highway, routes like I-495 or I-270. It wasn't coincidence. The killer had mapped out his getaways. So instead of waiting for the next crime, they decided to anticipate his exit. A net was cast across every highway exit and major road near previous heist locations. Police departments across the region were brought into the plan. Everyone was briefed and ready. "We called it a dragnet," Special Agent Coffey explained. "We set up a coordinated response that covered the entire D.C. area. Every officer knew what to look for. Every time a bank robbery was reported, officers at nearby exits would be on alert, watching for a suspect vehicle that matched the killer's usual style. It was a massive operation, but they hoped it would give them their first real shot at stopping him. They knew the next stolen car would be the trigger, the starting point. Once that happened, it would only be a matter of time before he tried to hit another bank. And when he did, they'd be waiting. Every morning at 5 a.m., Special Agent Coffee reviewed overnight reports of stolen cars, hoping one would match the killer's methods. He knew the timeline well. The suspect always stole a vehicle early, then struck a bank just before it opened. But for months, nothing happened. No matching cases. It was like the killer had vanished. Then on October 9, 1992, they got a hit. In Baltimore, a masked man approached a 15-year-old girl as she walked to her mother's car. He pointed a gun and demanded the keys. "Give me the keys. Now, or I'll shoot." A nearby police officer heard the commotion and rushed over just as a shot rang out. The suspect jumped into the black Honda Civic and sped off. The officer, recognizing this could be their guy, alerted regional law enforcement. The killer was on the move again, and this time, they were ready. Every exit in the greater D.C. area was now under watch. Police from Maryland, D.C., and Northern Virginia mobilized quickly. They stopped any vehicle matching the description, checking for signs it might be stolen. They weren't taking chances. They knew this wasn't just a car thief. This was a murderer. Meanwhile, 80 kilometers away in Brunswick, Maryland, Officer Gary Klein was on patrol when he noticed a small black car missing its front license plate. As it drove past, he saw something that made his heart race. The driver was wearing a ski mask. He followed the car and radioed the plate number to dispatch. Suddenly, the driver hit the gas and took off. Dispatch came back with match. The suspect was wanted for attempted murder in Baltimore. Now it was a full-blown pursuit. "I was running on pure adrenaline," Klein later said. "I knew I had to stop him before anyone else got hurt." The chase stretched from Maryland to Virginia, with the suspect weaving dangerously through traffic at over 90 miles per hour. At one point, he crossed a bridge, forcing oncoming cars to swerve out of the way. Klein had to slow down to avoid collision, but once traffic cleared, he closed the gap. Eventually, the suspect veered onto a narrow road in West Virginia. The rain was pouring and his speed caught up with him. He lost control, crashed, and skidded off the road. Klein drew his weapon and approached. Out of the car, "Now!" he shouted. The suspect ducked to the passenger side and raised a gun. Klein held his fire, wary of hitting a civilian. Then, in a split-second move, the suspect took the car into reverse and tried to ram the officer's vehicle. He then sped down a small gravel path and crashed into a bulldozer at the end of a dead-end road. It was over. He had nowhere left to run. Klein closed in, shouting for him to surrender. "Hands up! Step away from the car." The suspect ducked behind the vehicle and returned fire. Klein kept moving, knowing staying still could be fatal. He managed to change positions without being seen. When the suspect blindly fired again, Klein returned shots, but didn't land a hit. Finally, backup arrived. Klein felt a wave of relief. After all this time, he wasn't alone anymore. Within minutes, police units from multiple jurisdictions swarmed the area. The killer was surrounded. Officers took cover, weapons raised, ready for anything. Suddenly, the suspect stood up, circled his car, and held a gun to his own head. "Drop the weapon," officers shouted, but he didn't listen. West Virginia State Trooper John Jeff tried to calm him down. "Take it easy. We can talk this through." The man began to open up. He said he was unemployed, overwhelmed by life, and regretted the things he'd done, though he didn't say what those things were. After nearly an hour of tense back and forth, the suspect made a strange request. "I want to talk to my mom," he said. He gave him a phone number, and eventually, police reached a woman he claimed was his mother, but he still wasn't sure. "That's not her. Ask her what my favorite cookies are," he said. When she answered correctly and began to cry, something in him seemed to break. He told her he loved her. Then, in what felt like slow motion, he pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing happened. That moment of hesitation gave officers the chance they needed. They tackled him, wrestled the weapon from his hand, and placed him under arrest. The
The .357 Ruger revolver he had been carrying was confirmed to be the exact weapon used in the murders. The bullets and the cylinder matched those found in every single crime scene. After nearly a year of terror, the man who'd haunted the suburbs of D.C. was finally in custody. He was identified as Alvin Newman. Though he admitted to the carjacking in Baltimore, he denied any involvement in the killings. But the evidence told a different story. Ballistics expert Joe Capera performed a final test. He fired Newman's gun in the lab, then compared the markings on the test bullets to those collected from the 4 murders. It was a perfect match. Every groove, every scratch, lined up exactly. That was the proof prosecutors needed. With irrefutable forensic evidence, they prepared to take the case to trial. Faced with overwhelming charges, Newman chose to take a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He confessed to all charges, the murders, the robberies, the assaults. In the end, Alvin Newman was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without parole, plus 100 additional years for weapons violations. This case was closed not by luck, but by the relentless coordination of more than a dozen law enforcement agencies working together. As one officer put it, you get 10 minutes to feel proud, and then another case at your desk. But for those involved, that brief moment of victory meant everything. They had stopped a cold-blooded killer before he could destroy more lives.